I am reading this article from my blog, link in the description. How to unlock the full power of speaking in tongues. Before I get into the article, a quick mention. I have a shop selling t-shirts with custom speaking in tongues quotes. Link is in the description. Speaking in tongues is a powerful gift on its own, but you can add something to make it even more powerful. Gifts that come from God are usually complete on their own, but we can still combine them to make them even more powerful. To unlock the full power of speaking in tongues, add fasting to the mix. A simple fast greatly increases the power of your tongues. What you could not achieve by speaking in tongues alone can be achieved when you speak in tongues while fasting. I have tested fasting and speaking in tongues, and 100% of the time, the results were impressive. There was a time I was really low. It was one of my lowest moments in life. If I didn't know God, probably I would have contemplated suicide. But because I knew God and I had the gift of speaking in tongues, I decided to channel all the power I could to change my situation. I did an indefinite fast while speaking in tongues. By the second day, I had already gotten my breakthrough, and the Lord asked me to end the fast the following day. 3 days after I began my fast, I had my breakthrough, and it felt as if I had not suffered anything. The results of fasting and speaking in tongues are impressive. Other times, I have fasted just for the love of it and spoken in tongues. There is a considerable difference than when I speak in tongues without fasting. How fasting unlocks the full power of speaking in tongues. 1. Fasting kills the resistance against speaking in tongues. I have written in a previous article how the flesh hinders speaking in tongues. The devil capitalizes on the desires of the flesh to hinder us from speaking in tongues. When you combine fasting and speaking in tongues, you easily overpower your flesh. Fasting knocks down the flesh and its distractions, which paves way for a flawless speaking in tongues session. When I speak in tongues, when I'm fasting, I get access to the heavens in a matter of minutes. When I speak in tongues when I'm not fasting, it takes me over half an hour to get the flow, but when I'm fasting, I get the flow in less than 10 minutes. For a fruitful session of speaking in tongues, the flesh must be subdued. Subduing the flesh is easier when you're fasting. An early access to the spiritual realms when you are speaking in tongues means you can go deep within a short time. 10 minutes of speaking in tongues while fasting get you the same level that 30 minutes of speaking in tongues without fasting get you. An hour of speaking in tongues while fasting gets you to the level that will require you 3 hours of speaking in tongues without fasting to access. Eliminating the resistance of the flesh in speaking in tongues greatly increases the effectiveness of your tongues. 2. Fasting increases urgency, which is important during speaking in tongues. One of the obstacles when it comes to speaking in tongues is lethargy, that feeling of laziness. Many times we postpone speaking in tongues because we don't feel the need to do it. Fasting increases urgency. You feel a powerful drive to pray. Our minds know that the whole purpose of fasting is to access God, and we access God by prayer. The moment you set your mind to fast subconsciously, you have set your mind to pray. In that state, you find it easy to pray. In addition, there is a desire to maximize your fasting. Giving up food is not easy. When you do it, you will naturally want to reap a good fruit out of it. The desire to get great results out of your fast increases your urgency to speak in tongues. The urgency to speak in tongues is further accelerated by the fact that there is little resistance. It is like driving on a freeway with little traffic. The open space urges you to go faster. It also happens that we fast when we are in serious trouble. In the Bible, we know the case of Esther and the Jews who fasted for 3 days. Their lives depended on the fast. Naturally, they were going to experience a great urgency. I decided to do the indefinite fast I mentioned above because my life was on the verge of collapse. It was the last resort. I channeled all my energy into the fast, and of course that gave me a great urgency to speak in tongues. If you often struggle with getting the urge to speak in tongues, fasting will cultivate the urge for you. 3. Fasting keeps you in the mood of speaking in tongues. When you are fasting, your spirit is strong. Because your spirit is strong, you remain connected to the spiritual realm all through. In that state, speaking in tongues comes naturally. Your spiritual ears are alert, your eyes are open, and you easily commune with God. When you speak in tongues, you feel very close to God. Fasting keeps you in a prayer mood that greatly increases the effectiveness of the tongues you speak. There was a day I fasted and spoke in tongues. When I was speaking in tongues, I felt very close to God. Where I was kneeling, I felt the throne of God was in front of me, and everything I was speaking was going directly to God. It was very encouraging, and it felt so good. The mood that fasting creates is good for speaking in tongues and experiencing the deep mysteries of God. Why we should fast and speak in tongues often. We may not be in a position to fast and speak in tongues every day, but we can create time to do it as often as we can. Fasting and speaking in tongues is more like a turbocharger in a car. It improves performance when necessary. While speaking in tongues on its own can nourish us, we need to fast and speak in tongues once in a while to raise our base performance in prayer. When you fast and speak in tongues, you move to a new level, which you will be operating at when you speak in tongues without fasting. My frequency of speaking in tongues while fasting has gone down as I have grown in the gift. It was an issue of concern until when the Holy Spirit revealed to me what was happening. He reminded me of the time Jesus answered the disciples of John the Baptist in Matthew chapter 9 verse 14 about fasting. Jesus told them his disciples do not fast because they have the bridegroom with them. The truth is that the closer you get to Christ, the less you will need to fast. When you are very close to Jesus, all your needs are met without you having to fast to ask for them. The Holy Spirit taught me that fasting is primarily meant to draw us closer to God. Once we are close to God and we don't drift away, fasting is not needed. This is why we will not be fasting in heaven. Therefore, expect your urge to fast to go down the closer you get to God. You will be enjoying the full power of speaking in tongues without fasting. But while you are still some distance away from God, fast and speak in tongues until you are at the foot of His throne. Tips to get the best results out of speaking in tongues and fasting. 1. Speak in tongues at the start of the fast. When you start your fast, make sure you spend some time speaking in tongues. The tongues you speak at the beginning of your fast will affirm to your mind that you have started the fast. It is usually hard to know you are fasting if you didn't have a session of prayer to mark the beginning of your fast. The temptation to eat during a fast is greatly reduced when you start your fast with a session of speaking in tongues. The session of speaking in tongues at the beginning of your fast will also pave way for you in the spiritual realm. Usually, the devil puts obstacles to block our access to heaven. When you start your fast by speaking in tongues, you do considerable damage to the obstacles the enemy has put up, which will make it easy for you the next time you come to pray. 2. Avoid pleasures of the flesh. Fasting is primarily denying your flesh its desires so that your spirit can have ample time accessing God. We usually interpret fasting to mean denying ourselves food, but in real sense, fasting should be denying ourselves any form of pleasures. In the Bible, people who fasted did not only deny themselves food, but they also wore sackcloth, which is denying themselves good clothing. Others, such as John the Baptist and even Jesus, went to the wilderness while fasting, which is a harsh environment. We do not necessarily have to go to the extent of wearing sackcloth and going to the wilderness, but it goes to show that fasting is denying ourselves as much pleasure as possible. Some people avoid social media when they are fasting. That is a great move. Others lock themselves in the house the entire time they are fasting. That is another form of denying yourself pleasures. Whatever pleasure you can sacrifice while speaking in tongues, do it. It will go a long way in paving way for you to access the heavens. 3. Have your serious session of speaking in tongues towards the end of the fast. At the beginning of your fast, your flesh is usually still strong because it still has the energy from the pleasures you engaged in. But as you progress with the fast, your flesh slowly weakens. The best time to make your most serious prayer when you're fasting is when your flesh is weak, but you still have energy in your body. From my experience, I usually hit the sweet spot towards the end of the first day of my fast and the beginning of the second day. It is during that time that I speak in tongues with all my strength and give everything to the cause. On the second day, I usually try to push if I still have energy, but in most cases, I am usually exhausted from the session of the previous day. My second day of fasting and speaking in tongues is usually the day that I get communication from God and direction of what to do next. The third day is usually dedicated for Thanksgiving. The longest fast I have ever had lasted for 7 days. It was a fluids-only fast. Most of my fasts are usually one-day fasts. They work best for me. They are short, which makes it easy to do them, but they still yield the results I want. How to unlock the full power of speaking in tongues. Conclusion. Speaking in tongues and fasting is a powerful combination that will break any spiritual resistance in existence. I have witnessed the power of the combination countless times. I know it does wonders. If you have not tapped into the full potential of speaking in tongues, it is time to add fasting to the mix. You don't have to fast for many days to experience the power. A one-day fast is sufficient to draw enough power to solve your situation. When choosing the number of days to fast, I suggest you pick them based on the seriousness of your situation. If it is a life or death situation, like the one Esther was in, a 3-day fast will do the work. In my opinion, any fast that lasts more than 3 days is an overkill. Jesus did a 40-day fast, and it is understandable because his mission was tremendous. He was fasting to prepare for the salvation of all men. But fasting for your own salvation shouldn't take you longer than 3 days. A fast longer than 3 days increases the chances of distractions, which is why I recommend keeping it short and powerful. Peace.